Well, thank you, Dan, for your time.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
It's the end of a long work day, I'm sure, so I really appreciate you staying late to talk
Absolutely.
with me today. So if you don't mind, if you would introduce yourself and just kind of tell what you do.
Yep, so my name's Dan Mariaski. I'm a physical therapist as well as a certified athletic trainer.
Oh.
And then I'm also board certified in orthopedic physical therapy. So I did after I graduated from PT school, I stayed on and did a 1-year orthopedic residency where I was a graduate teaching assistant in the physical therapy program while I was a licensed practitioner at a hospital.
Oh, wow.
So I treated 3 days a week, and then 2 days a week I was teaching.
Oh my gosh.
And that allowed me to then sit for the board certification, quote unquote, faster than if I would have just went straight out into patient care.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I've been a physical therapist for a little over 8 years now.
Okay.
And I've practiced here at Spooner Physical Therapy in Scottsdale for just over 7.
Okay, great. So what do you like about being a physical therapist? What don't you like?
So one of the main reasons why I chose physical therapy and left athletic training was the ability to have a greater work-life balance.
Okay.
So my senior year of college, probably my junior year of college, my program director in athletic training recognized that I spent a lot more time on the rehab of athletes than I did watching practice.
Okay.
So he said, well, one of my good friends is a physical therapist. Why don't you go shadow him during our January term, we just took 1 class. So I shadowed one of his good friends for a full 40 hours a week for 1 full month.
Okay. Wow.
And got college credit for it. So that's kind of what opened my eyes to the world of physical therapy.
Okay.
And I realized that that's kind of where I thought I wanted to go because I did truly like the rehabilitative component of the injury spectrum, right? Or the performance spectrum, I guess would be a better way to state it.
Okay.
So then my senior year, as seniors, we were assigned to 1 team, and I was assigned to our men's basketball team.
Okay.
So that meant I started in the middle of October, and I didn't finish until the middle of March.
Okay.
And that meant that my days were, if I had an injured athlete and it was game week, there'd be a lot of times I was in the athletic
You gotta stay, okay.
athletic training room at 6 a.m., getting the athlete ready, going to class, getting ready for practice. I chose to watch film with the team because I enjoyed the sport.
Okay.
Go to dinner, study, potentially rehab again.
Wow.
Or if it was game night, then it was set up for game, do games, do tear down for our athletes and their athletes, right? So sometimes those hours were 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So it just wasn't conducive, and so that's when I decided physical therapy was really the route to go.
Okay. So it's
So some of it was work-life balance, some of it was
Work-life
enjoying the injury side of the performance spectrum.
Okay.
Now that I've been out, I really like the performance side of the injury spectrum. I like
Okay.
the preventative or reduction of injury aspect of the spectrum, plus then the actual injury rehabilitative component of the spectrum.
Nice.
So I feel like now as a licensed therapist and with my skill set, I can really go across the entire.
sorry.
That's okay.
You gotta watch it by yourself now, okay? I'm sorry. I'll watch it with you later, okay? Sorry.
That's okay. To really cover the entire spectrum from reducing the likelihood of injury to managing acute injuries to managing post-operative injuries to then working on return to sport and or performance training.
Okay. Wow, neat. Okay. Is there anything you don't like about?
So the biggest downer of any job in healthcare is the documentation component, right? Most people get in because they want to take care of a patient, but there's always that flip side. For every patient I take care of, there's a note that I have to write for that data service.
Okay,
And so
right.
nobody likes sitting behind a computer or dictating or any of that stuff. It's just tedious and time consuming, but you have to do it to meet state standards to protect the public and to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So that's by far the worst part of my job.
Okay.
Right? And there's ebbs and flows to the workday, right? There's fun patients, there's patients that take your energy away, there's patients that give you energy back. And so sometimes you look at your day and you're like, all right, this is gonna be a grind to get through the day based on who's on my schedule, right? And then there's other days you're like, this is going to be an awesome day. It's going to be so much fun. But that's the reality, and I think that's the reality in any job.
A lot of, yeah,
where you
a lot of
interact with other
careers.
people, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I don't think that's unique just to physical therapy.
Okay, I agree. Is there a favorite client that you can, patient I should say, that really shows how you make a difference in your job? I think a lot of students really, you know, especially if they're not sure what they want to do, that's one of the big things that they'll say is, I really want to make a difference.
You know, that's a good question. It's probably really hard to just think of one. I guess that's a good problem to have,
Yeah,
right?
I
That,
think
that
so.
one doesn't stick out in my head. For me, usually it's the person that's truly like, look, I came in today and I did this that I wasn't able to do 3 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. Like, for instance,
Okay.
I had a guy come in today who was like, 2 weeks ago, I couldn't sit the equivalent of crisscross applesauce at Temple. I couldn't sit during the services. And
Okay.
I was able to sit longer on Sunday. He was like, that's a big deal to me, right? That's
Okay.
important in my life. Okay, so
Right.
that's one small example that some people wouldn't conceptualize, but that was a big deal in that guy's life, right?
Right.
Versus the complete opposite end of the spectrum, I have the privilege, I've worked with a number of professional athletes. And one of the athletes that I worked with was recognized in his sport for the longest active consecutive games played for a period of time that I was working with him in the off season.
Okay.
So when I was working with him in the off season, it was managing whatever damage had been done during the season, right?
Right.
Then preparing his body to get ready for the upcoming season and getting him to a point where we had his entire system moving more efficiently, and that led to him being able to play almost 2 full seasons without missing a game.
Wow, that's awesome.
So, you know, I mean, again,
Yeah.
two completely opposite ends of the spectrum, but what I want to make sure I articulate is physical therapy isn't all about working with that professional athlete. That's an extremely small percentage
Right,
of what
that's probably important.
we
Yes.
do, right? Like, you know, a lot of therapists get in, or I talk to prospective students and they say, I want to work with professional athletes. That's a really, really, really small percentage of people that need to move.
Okay.
Right? So, you know, the fun part about my job is I work from 10 to 100. That's my age
Okay.
span. I don't typically see kids younger than 10. We have people that'll do that. That's
Okay.
just not my skill set.
Okay.
So 10 to 100, right? And now part of the most fun of my job is working with that 55 plus because they have a lot of life experience,
Okay.
right?
Good.
And so I do enjoy that now.
That's great. Cool. Okay. So now, if you could just briefly, I know we did talk about it, like what education is needed to be a physical therapist these days?
Yep,
Because
so
that's gonna recently
the
change.
majority of programs now have moved to where they require a bachelor's degree before you can start the doctorate level programs. There are still a few programs out there that are master's levels programs. I would probably urge a little caution on applying to those programs because of an initiative the American Physical Therapy Association had put in place called Vision 2020, where they wanted all programs to transition to a doctorate level degree by 2020.
Okay.
So getting that we're 2018, accepting kids for 2019, I would probably say if you're going to go to physical therapy school, look for a doctorate level program.
Okay.
There are a few schools out there that will do like 3 years of college, and then you can go to physical therapy school off of that 3 years of college, so you
Okay.
technically don't earn a bachelor's degree. There's a few of those programs out there. But the
Okay.
vast majority of programs are 4-year bachelor degree and then
Okay.
transition into the doctorate level education.
Okay, wow. Okay, and then you have to get licensed, right?
Yep, so then once you
Maintain your-
complete graduation from an accredited program, you sit for a national board exam.
Okay.
That national board exam, basically, California might be the sole outlier as far as what their pass percentage is, but it's basically 75% on the national exam, which is a
Okay.
score out of 800. So 600, you need to score at
Oh,
least 600
okay.
points to become nationally licensed, and then
Okay.
each state has then a state license requirement. The state of
Okay.
Arizona requires you to take what's called a jurisprudence exam, which is the
Okay.
law exam. So you
Oh.
take an extra exam, yahoo, another test,
Yay.
where just to make sure that you understand what the state law pertaining to Arizona Physical Therapist scope of practice is regarding supervision of assisted personnel, physical therapists, assistants, and then just our specific rules and regulations.
Wow,
At
okay.
last check, there was like 21 states that require an additional law exam,
Okay.
which I think is the right thing to do.
Yeah, okay. Wow, all right. So then you have to keep up your licensure?
Yep,
and-
so our state requirements are 20 continuing education hours every 2 years.
Okay,
Those continuing education courses can be in a variety of different realms, clinical, kind of like in-service, and then administrative. They limit the administrative hours to make sure that you have some sort of clinical hours to maintain your license
Okay.
every 2 years. To get those 20 hours usually is not a problem for anybody that treats at a facility, right? If they're an independent contractor or they work for a travel agency, sometimes those are harder because they have to pay for those out of their own pocket. Versus here at Spooner Physical Therapy, that's a part of our benefit to our licensed
Ooh, okay.
employed therapists, where the company gives us an allotted dollar amount to spend towards continuing education every
oh,
year.
that's good. Yeah, that's good.
So that's a huge benefit to us.
Great. So is there a need for more physical therapy? I mean, if somebody wants to go into this, I mean, would you recommend it, or would you say it's saturated, we don't need any more?
I haven't looked at any job statistics since I stopped teaching in the formal didactic programs. But at last Google search of top 10 hottest jobs, physical therapist assistant was actually in the top 10. Physical therapist had dropped out. But to
Oh.
my knowledge at this point, I do not believe the job market is saturated.
Okay.
Now, getting into your ideal clinical setting early on sometimes can be challenging. There's not usually a shortage of jobs in places like hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, rehab facilities. Sometimes in certain parts of the country, getting into an outpatient job like I am at Spooner sometimes can be challenging, and other times it's not challenging.
Okay.
But to my knowledge right now, the market is not saturated.
Okay, that's good. You sound like you're pretty busy, so it's gotta be.
Being busy is a good
So,
problem to have.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So, do you recommend your job? I mean, you like it? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do like my job more days than not. You know,
Okay.
but there are still days that are draining.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's related to the documentation load, to be completely honest with you.
Okay.
When it comes to interacting with patients, interacting with prospective students, and then I have an administrative role within our company, so I have the privilege and responsibility of helping elevate all of our 100+ therapists. So I do that 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week I treat patients.
Oh, wow.
So that part of my job I absolutely love because it's different every day.
Okay.
And I would also say that physical therapy in general is different every time a patient walks in the door, every single time you see that
Right.
patient. So for
Yeah.
those people that really need that in their brain and need that fuel in their brain, I would highly encourage physical therapy to be part of their job or something to really look into, because it is different every single patient, every
That's
single
good.
day, right?
Cool,
Even
okay.
though they might be the same diagnosis, there are so many different personal factors that play into that person's diagnosis or movement disorder.
Absolutely. That was great. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I work as a personal trainer, of course. So, but yeah, I'll say that, you know, you can meet with 100 people who want to lose weight, and they're all going to be
And you're going to do it 100
incredibly-
different ways.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? And that's the joy and the challenge of what you do, because
Yes.
it stimulates your brain.
Right.
Sometimes you're like, okay, I don't know how to connect with this person, but yeah.
Right, absolutely. Cool. So if you don't mind, if I could kind of also pick your brain about PTA,
Yep.
you know, so a physical therapy assistant.
Yep.
So how does somebody get into that job, and what's the place for that job? Is
Yeah,
it
so
a-
physical therapist assistant, what I always talk to people who are struggling on what path to go is, what do you want to do? Do you want to evaluate patients, or do you want to treat patients?
Okay.
Because there are some people who they really want to treat patients. They don't care about the diagnosis component, right? And I use
Yeah.
diagnosis as a broad spectrum word.
Okay.
There's other patients who are other prospective students who say, you know what, I know I want to be in this field. At this point, it's wherever I can get in.
Oh, okay.
sometimes those students are the people who have tried at the doctorate level for 3 or 4 years and they haven't gotten in, and they say, I know this is what I want to do. I don't say that physical therapist assistant is settling, right?
Right.
That's
okay.
where I really want to pick their brain to say, is this the right thing for you that you really want to do? Do you want to be in this profession?
Okay.
Yes or no? And if they say yes, then that's where I will recommend physical therapist assistant. When I recommend that, I say, if you do this, you need to go at it with the same gusto that you were going at the doctorate level degree.
Okay.
Okay? So that's something I am very adamant about, the counseling component on finding their needs on.
Awesome.
So if they elect to go the physical therapist assistant route, there's 2 pathways to my knowledge. The first is an associate's level pathway. Both
Okay.
Most programs right now are both associate's degree. There's one program I know of that's a bachelor's degree. So they go in with no other prerequisites.
Okay.
So they go into the physical therapist assistant program, and there's a number of them in the Phoenix area, and they take their math, science, English, kind of gen ed requirements while taking physical therapist assistant specific classes.
Okay.
Okay, so that's
Wow.
one pathway.
Okay.
That pathway, obviously, as you can imagine, takes a little bit longer because they have to fulfill those additional courses.
Yeah. Okay.
The second route is if you come in with those additional courses already completed at another institution, even another community college, right?
Yeah.
Is to go into more of an accelerated class time where all that you take is physical therapist assistant courses. So you have your math and your science and all of those gen ed things done already, and it's more accelerated.
Wow, okay.
Those programs are usually around 4 to 6 semesters long.
Okay.
And there are,
3 years?
yeah, so
Okay.
like the program that I taught at in Omaha, Nebraska at Clarkson College, our transitional program was a 4-semester program.
Okay.
So they would do all their physical therapist assistant didactic curricula plus their clinical experiences in 4 semesters.
Wow.
So it's fairly similar to the rigor that
Yeah.
is at the doctorate level for physical therapists, right? Because we'll do that in 6 to 8 semesters all the way through.
Wow. Okay. So, so what are the pros and cons of PTA?
So a physical therapist assistant's job is to help carry out the plan of care of the licensed physical therapist. So
Okay.
me as a licensed physical therapist will do the initial evaluation and figure out the patient's movement dysfunctions and say, okay, here's where we can be successful, here's how we can help you.
Okay.
At that point, it is my job to determine, can my licensed physical therapist assistants in this clinic help carry out that plan of care? If they meet the skill set and the needs of this patient, I then have the option to pass that patient off and have the physical therapist assistant carry out and assist in our plan of care for that patient.
Okay.
So then the physical therapist assistant can do manual therapy techniques, can do exercise prescription as well, and then help with me and a communication team to say, here's what I'm seeing with this patient. I want to get them back with you because I think they're ready for the next X, Y, and Z steps.
Okay.
Sometimes that happens officially in documentation. Sometimes that happens via conversation. But I still have the ability as a licensed physical therapist to carry out those treatments as well, especially if I determine that, that patient isn't appropriate for a physical therapist assistant.
Okay.
That patient needs my unique skill sets or another one of my colleagues' unique skill sets that's another physical therapist. We will then say, we're going to keep that patient solely with us.
Okay.
So a physical therapist assistant basically can't do a few things. They can't do the first initial evaluation, and they
Okay.
can't do a reevaluation.
Okay.
Okay? They can participate in those things by assisting with subjective information gathering and objective informational gathering, but they
Okay.
technically can't make the formal assessment of
Okay.
that patient.
But that sounds like it leaves a whole lot that they can do.
Yes, there is a lot that
Wow.
they can do, absolutely.
Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. Can you kind of give an example maybe of like how to know which one to go into or not really? I mean, it's probably too individual. maybe.
That is pretty individual. What I usually encourage in that situation, if somebody is trying to figure out what they do, is to come and shadow.
Oh,
And
that's a
immerse
good idea.
themselves
Okay.
in a clinic where there is a physical therapist and a physical therapist assistant, and see how that relationship works together. Because like I said, I've interacted with some people when I was teaching that from an intelligence standpoint made me look like I was unintelligent because of how intelligent they were. But they just knew that the path they wanted to go was, all they wanted to do was treat patients. And usually physical therapist assistant programs are, when you look at dollars and cents to what you're gonna make, that gap is much narrower than the gap of what a physical therapist makes and what a doctorate level education costs, right? So there are some people that are like, look, it's gonna cost me $50,000 to go to physical therapist assistant school, and I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna make $45,000. That's a $5,000 difference versus if I go to a doctorate program, I might make $62,000, but I'm gonna be $100,000 in debt.
Okay.
Right? And I'm just throwing out random numbers, right? Like,
yeah,
but
right.
that's how some people analyze, is it worth the time and the money to get the doctorate degree, or is it worth the time and the money to get in and start making money sooner? Okay. But I think the best recommendation is to spend time in a clinic where you can see both providers in the same facility.
That's probably really good advice. Okay. Speaking of advice, do you have any just general advice for how people can be happy? What's the meaning of life? You know, all those small little details.
So this is interesting. We, the realization of burnout in the world of physical therapy is prevalent.
Okay.
And actually in all healthcare right now, it is very prevalent. The demands to be efficient, effective, and cost-effective are growing.
Okay.
Most reimbursements are being slashed across all medicine. So physicians assistants, nurses, physical therapists are all being slashed by third-party payers, so insurance companies. So what does that mean? You have to see a higher volume of patients to be able to meet basically to cover your salary, right?
Yeah,
and any
right.
potential bonuses that you may be eligible for.
Okay.
So managing that in the world of healthcare, managing burnout is something that's really challenging. So we've actually put some resources out talking about what burnout is, how to recognize it, and then some strategies to manage that. And one of the ways to manage that is really understanding the science of movement and how you can modify movement to make it individual to that patient that will always, always, always challenge your brain. If you get to the point where you're stagnant in any part of your job, regardless if it's in physical therapy or anything else, I would say it's time to reevaluate, right?
Yeah.
So what are ways that your prospective profession keeps it quote unquote fresh?
Yeah.
So physical therapy has that built in through some schools of thought, okay?
Cool.
So having that perspective, having other people to challenge you to be like, hey Dan, you're stagnant today. Or I saw this patient and you hadn't changed anything in 5 visits. That's gonna then challenge me to say, you know what, you're right. And that's gonna challenge me to think. And when I think, I'm gonna see a change in my patient. When I see that change in my patient, I'm grateful for the job that I do. Right?
Awesome.
Another fun part of my job is, my wife just finished her first half marathon on Sunday.
Oh, wow.
And so being able to help her train for that, manage her training routine, manage her stretching routine. We went to get her new shoes, and the place that we got her shoes from was like, look, you have the biggest advantage of anybody that the majority of people that come in here to buy shoes that are training for half marathon, because you have a physical therapist in your house.
Yeah, right.
Right? So like,
Right.
My wife sometimes is like, I don't really want to ask you because you had a long day at work. And I'm like, look, you're in the middle of training. I want to make sure that you stay healthy to complete your goals. So it's not too much to ask, right? Like,
that's awesome.
and then like I mentioned already, just finding diversity in my job, working here at Spooner of treating patients part-time and doing my administrative role has been really refreshing for me.
Cool.
Some other of my colleagues will do some pro bono work where they'll do outreaches at free clinics through local universities like Northern University, Arizona. Phoenix runs a pro bono clinic. And they staff it usually with students. Well, if they're staffing it with students, they have to licensed therapists to oversee those students for state law purposes. So some of our colleagues go and volunteer their time to get energy back because they're teaching students. So.
Cool. Yeah, so find all those different ways, like you said, keep challenging yourself.
Yep, and then, you know, I
Yeah,
mean, find something that
be
it
passionate,
re-energizes
yeah.
you outside of work. So whether that's activity, which most people who get into the world of physical therapy usually enjoy some sort of physical activity, right? So running, biking, hiking, swimming, triathlons, flag football, basketball, soccer, tennis, golf, whatever it might be, right? Like being able to realize when you're starting to get stressed and be able to have that refresher to re-energize yourself.
Cool. Absolutely. Yay. All right. So since you mentioned shadowing and
Yep.
it seems very, to promote it, would it be okay? Can people call you?
Yeah,
Can they
so
contact you?
what we typically do in those situations is we'll find out where they live and what their
Okay.
requests are, because what we try and do is maximize that experience, that observational shadow experience for that individual student. So
Okay.
sometimes that might
Oh, wow.
be shifting them to one of our other 20 locations.
Oh,
So we
wow.
have 20 locations throughout the metro, or throughout the Phoenix Valley. So sometimes it's like, oh, I live in Peoria. Okay, great, we have a clinic in Peoria.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I live in the Fountain Hills area. Okay, great, let's go to the Fountain Hills area.
Oh, that's
Or they're
awesome.
like, hey, I really want to work with this type of population. I can say, all right, based on what I know about what you want to see and observe, here's the therapists that have that skill set.
Okay.
Okay.
That's awesome. Okay.
And
So
each individual clinic has a point contact person.
Okay. That's great. Okay. And would they also be able to point them in the right direction for PT versus PTA? 'Cause
Some
you
of
seem very knowledgeable
some of
about
them
that.
will, some of them won't. If they,
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I have the unique advantage because I taught in a physical therapist
Yes.
assistant program for 2 semesters, once as a student and once as a licensed therapist. So I was ingrained in that and understanding how to communicate that appropriately to our fellow professionals. But if somebody is truly trying to determine that unique pathway, I would just help steer them to a clinic where there is a PT and a PTA in the
Okay.
clinic.
Okay.
And we have a number of clinics that have PT, PTAs in them. So Fountain Hills, Scottsdale, North Phoenix, Phoenix, North Mesa, Mesa Gateway, South Mountain, Lavine, Goodyear, Glendale,
Wow.
Peoria, all have physical therapist assistants in their clinics.
Okay.
I think I got them all.
Okay.
So I think that was 10. So 10 of our 20 clinics have a physical therapist assistant
Okay.
in their clinic right now.
Okay. That's great. Okay. All right. So we'll have them look up where to contact for each individual clinic. And anything else that we should talk about being a PT
Not that I
that we
can
haven't
think of.
talked about already?
No, I don't think so.
All right, great. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. Sorry for the little bit of distractions here.
Doesn't bother me.